The objective of tonight's webinar is to make you safer in multi-engine aircraft. Most multi-engine courses are unfortunately a very quick rote-level blur. Pilots are usually shopping on price and they get a certificate but very little real education and understanding. As a result, you see accidents like this that are totally avoidable and the result of handling errors. The purpose of two engines, after all, is redundancy and safety, but that requires a thorough understanding and a commitment to proficiency. Tonight we will explain exactly why accidents like this happened and how to cope with an engine failure and fly on asymmetric single-engine thrust. These accidents are avoidable. We have Hobie Tomlinson with us, who has been a TWA captain for 35 years and 17 years in the flight training department. He also was a DPE for over 40 years and has 17,000 hours of dual. Hello, everyone. My name's Dave St. George. I'm the Executive Director of SAFE. Thank you all for joining us. Holiday season coming up. If you're in upstate like me and Hobie, it's snowy and cold. And Nick Horn, who's running the whole thing, is basking in the heat of Miami down there. But anyway, we're switching gears tonight. We've talked a little bit about using the rudder for slip and skid and all that. And I thought we'd access some of the resources we have in SAFE. You know, we're very lucky. People I talk to on a daily basis, like Hobie, have massive experience. I mean, when I look through his bio, more than 40,000 hours, 17,000 dual. And you can see up there in the background the Boeing 747 that he's flown across the Atlantic more than 1,000 times. So we'll get right to the show. We're talking about multi-engine. The segue from what we were doing with tail wheels is really that when we train people in twins, we do find that people who can use their feet are actually a lot better at it. Wouldn't you say that, Hobie?
I would agree.
But the point I made, and I don't know if you guys saw the blog that came out yesterday or the Facebook post today, what we see a lot in flight training is the multi-engine is a very rushed affair. It's a lot of pilots' first introduction to professional flying. And it's usually something they buy at a discount, cheap, and they get a very quick and perfunctory view of multi-engine flying. A lot of times they don't get a better analysis of aerodynamics. They might fly a King Air. They might be in the right seat of a jet. They go right to type ratings, and that whole knowledge base never gets updated from where it was. In the announcement that went out with the FAA, I put a recommendation for a course, and it's ARD in the FAA safety.gov. And it's a really good course on multi-engine. So I think, Nick, you have that. You can put it in the chat. There's a couple of links. Highly recommend that. So to start off, what I'd like to do quick is just launch this one poll. And if you would just tell me where you are in terms of pilot experience, how many of you are multi-engine rated, how many of you are MEIs, and that way Hobie and I can kind of tailor our presentation to your level of experience. So you should see a poll there. Okay, we have a few student pilots, a few private pilots, instrument rated. Thank you all. Keep answering. I'll tell you what we're seeing here, Hobie, so you know.
All right.
Looks like almost 75% of the people are multi-engine rated. And your question that you wanted, Hobie, how many people, when did they last practice a VMC demonstration? So about 25% within the last month, about 33%, it was a year ago, 21% sometime in the last 5 years, 22% said it's so long ago they can't remember. So I think we have the audience that we want. It looks like about 16% of the people did go through the FAA multi-engine course. Thank you very much. And about half and half on SAFE members. So everyone got my joke there at the end. You are all welcome to join. SAFE is a not-for-profit organization, and it's a 501c3. So we're actually a charity. My board of directors is always a little chagrined, but basically all we do is sell safety. We give it away. And tonight's presenter is Hobie. And you want to lead with anything? You want to go right to the slides there, Hobie?
I think we go into the slides. I mean, part of what we're doing here today is that, there's all kinds of articles about why multi-engine airplanes flat spin, but nobody talks about how to not have that happen. So that's what we're going to try to do.
Cool. And it should be geared for those of you that are just pilots, but especially you people that are multi-engine instructors. So you see safepilots.org if you want to join us and get a third off of ForeFlight. Every pilot is invited to join, and you do get that discount, very generous discount from ForeFlight. We appreciate the sponsorship. There we go, Hobie. You're off.
Yeah, just click through that one.
Who's that young man?
That's me. That's a whole career in 4 slides.
There's a Beach 18.
But anyway, here's my bio, right? CCIP Triple P. That's National CFI of the Year in 2012. And I got the Spirit of Flight Award that year. I got my CFI in 1965. I was a DPE for 77 to 22. And I spent the last 14 years with TWA in the training center and ended up 747 flight manager, which is kind of interesting. All the good flights I got to do. And I'm a lifetime safe member, obviously. I got to do one more master CFI. So what we're talking about is safety training, AME, asymmetric flight maneuvers. And actually, I'll give Tom Turner credit for coming up with that term, but I like it because what we're trying to do is separate that from the FAA VMC demonstration. So this is a training maneuver, and as David said, things my instructor never told me. So we're going to talk about some of them today. All right, we can go to the next one. So I want to talk just about some sample accidents and what happened. The first one is Addison, Texas, on June 30, 2009. And this is absolutely complacency. The gentleman did the takeoff with 2 hands on the yoke. And of course, one of the throttles came back. He didn't have the friction lock set. So one of the throttles rolled back because he didn't have his hand on the throttle, right? And, if you're sitting in the right seat and you see something dumb going on, don't just sit there and let somebody kill you. Take advantage. I mean, the first officer was there. He should have pushed it. He was talking about it, but he never pushed the throttle back up. Anyway, they yanked it in the air. He jumped on the wrong rudder. And, when you think about you're well away from stall speed, if you, and then he put the aileron in, right? So the aileron gives you enough side slips to stall the vertical stabilizer. The rest is history. It just did a snap roll and went into the ground. The Cessna 310 North Las Vegas is a good one because this is one where I don't know why he did this. And Flywires talked a lot about this, but the bottom line is he took off in North Las Vegas, had an engine failure. Instead of just turning around and landing, he decided to divert to Henderson. And I looked at the density altitude, and that airplane should have been able to stay in the air, but for whatever reason, he got it slow and he couldn't get it back. And then there came a point where he just needed to land it, basically, and he could have walked away from it, but he didn't. And he put the aileron in, same thing. And you can go on, you can look at it, accident up, and you can see the snap roll into the ground. And there's a couple of YouTube, there's security cameras that saw that. But the one that got me thinking here was this other one, the Beach 55 in Westfield, Mass. And that one happened on my birthday, January 14th. And, this was a very experienced instructor, and I'm not sure what happened, but when they found the airplane, it still had ice on it. Now, he was at 4,000 feet. Unfortunately, he had the owner of the company with him in the back seat. And of course, they got into a flat spin with it. In the Baron, you're always supposed to be above 5,500 feet. But I can tell you this, if you get in a flat spin, it doesn't matter where you are. We probably have all seen that video of that ATR down there in Brazil, flat spinning in from 19,000 feet. And so there's no fix to that.
And you were the one that said that's a lot of times an aileron issue. So we want to make sure that we cover the MEI.
Aileron is it. Yeah.
Yeah. When I do tests for academies, if you get close to VMC, everyone's terrified. They really don't seem to demonstrate it like you do. And I know when Hobie does a VMC demo, he lets it drift the full 20 degrees before he recovers it. And it's like stalls. And we were talking last time about PTSD. People have training scars from stall training. Well, I think the same thing happens with twins. People get that fear from their instructors.
I was telling David, I usually do stalls before I get into VMC stuff because the Beechcraft, especially, actually all the beaches roll left, but the beach will tend to roll left in a stall. And in fact, that's a good place to teach them to stay off the ailerons right there because.
And as an MEI, that also gives you a choice to kind of profile your learner and see how nervous they are and see how proficient they are on the controls. When I do a flight test, I have to go to somebody I haven't even met and start chopping engines. So it's can be a very interesting experience.
Not only somebody you haven't met, but an airplane you've never flown before.
Well, you've done that for years, Hobie.
They all can be a little different. All right, let's have the next slide, please. So what are our objectives? We want to come up with a safe method to teach this. And we're going to talk about the FAA practical test maneuver. But basically, the FAA maneuver is a test pilot maneuver, and it can be very dangerous if it's not done right. I've watched a lot of these videos where people talk about it, and you get these fantastic briefings, but nobody really gets in there where you're dealing with asymmetric thrust. And you can't get muscle memory from a briefing. You got to get out there and fly it. And when things happen, it happens very fast. So you're going to fall back to your training, basically. And if it's not there, you got a problem. So that FAA maneuver is intolerant of student errors. I mean, this is not new. When I started flying and this is interesting, I first got my multi-engine rating, right? And so I didn't have enough time to fly charter. So guess what? I started out teaching multi-engine ratings and twin Comanches, but the only reason I'm still here is somebody gave me some good advice. And at that time, the FAA had decided that they were going to do this down low. So it had a big spread between stall and VMC. And I mean, this is 1965, right? They were spinning twin Comanches and they've been spinning them ever since. So the twin Comanche is very intolerant of aileron, especially, and it's a flat spinner. So anyway,
you're scaring me, buddy. That's what I got to work with now.
If you do it right, it's not a problem. But if you do it wrong, it's a big problem. So here's the deal. I mean, you got a lot of new CFIs, and they're not trained. We're going to talk about these other twins, but certainly the legacy twins are not. They don't have a lot of experience in them. And the other thing I'm going to say is that everybody's got that 5-degree bank in their brain, but if you read what the ACS says, it says for optimal performance, and everybody pretty much in industry agrees optimal performance is a 2-degree bank. So that makes it a little better. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. So I just put some training axioms down here, right? So pitch plus power plus configuration equals performance. Well, that's the first one. Now, your artificial horizon, your ADI is a controlling instrument. All the others are performance instruments. So you see people chasing airspeed. You don't need to chase airspeed. If you have the pitch right, the airspeed will fix itself, right? And we talked about energy management the other day in one of these webinars, but here's the deal. The elevators control the flight path. The throttles control the speed. So you're going to make the airplane fly the path you want with the elevators, and you set your throttles. In normal flying, you set your throttles off the airspeed indicator or the vertical speed if you're behind the power curve. But so you want to teach pitch, power, configuration targets. And for example, the Baron, I mean, all airplanes, now that we've got glass, we find out for years we're lying to ourselves when we go set our horizon on the level, right? All airplanes fly about 2.5 degrees of pitch, basically. They're going to lift off about 5 degrees. I always say if you've got a flight director, have it up when you do a takeoff, because there's your acceleration target's always 7 degrees to clean it up. And then a Baron, once it's cleaned up, will go up to about 10 degrees. Jet will go 15 probably. But the point is, where people get in trouble is with the ailerons. The ailerons are most efficient at 0 AOA, which is why if you have to do in an upset, you need to roll the airplane level, you unload the wing, because then the ailerons are going to give you max roll. And in fact, when we talk about this in unusual attitudes, I have people put 2 hands on the wheel because you want it to get to stop. You don't want a little, if you're dealing with an upset, you want maximum roll rate. And that happens with not putting a load on the airplane. But when you get high away, then the aileron does not produce roll, it produces yaw. And that's what gets people a lot of trouble. And the other thing is energy is life. So what I mean is the performance speeds in these airplanes are always above the control speeds. So this is a cockpit discipline issue. I mean, if you don't violate your control speed, and in the Baron, VYSC is 99 and VXSC is 96. So you only got 3 knots between the two. So you need to, whether it goes up or down, if you stay with that speed, you're not going to have any control issues. If you bleed off, then you're going to have control issues. So you can't force performance. It is what it is. You have to accept it, basically. All right, next slide, Nick, please. So then everybody thinks you have to be very fast. The old guys used to say, wind their watch, right? So think, then act. Don't react, right? Never do anything at the spur of the moment. And accuracy is far more important than speed. One of the things we do with these airplanes, and we'll talk about in takeoff, you can take off and put an engine back to drag, just close the throttle, and you can probably sit there 5 or 6 seconds and it still's not really going down. So accuracy is more important than speed. You got to get it right the first time. As the old saying, some mistakes you can only make once, right? So one engine and operative power available is a function of rudder authority. What do I mean by that? If I'm below my VMC, then I have to reduce the power to the rudder authority I have. I can't use ailerons. This is all rudder. So one of the VMC demonstrations we're going to talk about is where we do set up for an off-fuel landing, and you have to back the power off. You're not going to crash your blue line. You got to get it slowed down. So the Baron has a 5,000 AGL hard floor for all VMC maneuver training. And I think, that's just a safety buffer. The FAA says you have to be above 3. But I say if you get this thing to a flat spin, it doesn't matter. There's no fix to that. So what we're talking about is you can have a rating and not be proficient. I mean, these are people that don't do regular recurrent training, or in fact, you can just never had the training in the first place. So, it's like, why do people IFR ratings get in trouble when they go VMC to IMCs? Because they're not proficient at it. Piece of paper. One of my old mentors used to say, he was an old Air Corps pilot. And he said, put that radio up there in the windshield, see if that's going to fly the airplane. And basically it doesn't. So, and the puppy mill that's David's term, but basically these courses lend themselves to just throwing people through, and it's all rote. And that's what we're trying to get away from. All right, next slide, please, Nick. So all the times I've ever been scared training is student impulsivity. And I mean, they sometimes do it's a form of panic, I guess. They just do off the wall things. So always guard the controls and always be mentally flying airplanes. So when I'm instructing, my brain is flying that airplane. And when it diverges from where I think it should go, then I'm ready to do stuff. And you have to guard the controls. I mean, especially the ailerons, because boy, if they snap that aileron in you and it gets away from you, it's very difficult to fix. So you got to intervene.
I was going to say I almost put on this slide when I was reviewing it, MEI over on the right, because I think this is a really important thing for the multi-engine instructors. Right. Take a screenshot of that when it comes back up, because what Hobie's got here is, 17,000 hours of dual, mostly in twins, a lot of it in big jets, but, do not let it get away from you with somebody that's fast on the controls, impulsive. And when I'm testing, I see these people that were taught to do the drill like as fast as they can. And it's a big mistake. As Hobie says, take your time. It's not going anywhere. And so long as you get the pitch down, you've got all the time in the world.
Right. And when I'm doing these things, my hands are on the ailerons. I'm not putting any pressure on unless it tries to turn, and I stop it. But I'm not, my hand is there. It has to be there, as you don't have any time. So the minimum runway that I'll use is 5,000 feet by 100 feet wide, basically. And accelerate stop on a Baron can be about 3,600 feet roughly. So you got a little margin there. And then one of the things a lot of people are learning in the Tecum and the Diam 62 twins, and you get an unrestricted rating, but there's no way that prepares you to fly the classic twins. I mean, one of the problems with the classic twins, the people with a bunch of bucks are getting into single engine turbines. So actually the twins are, if you look at a Baron, you can buy a Baron for half what you could buy an A36 Bonanza for, and they're a great airplane. So you have a whole new group of people getting into these airplanes, and a lot of them being rebuilt. They're great airplanes, but you need to learn how to fly them. All right, let's try this. So we're going to start by teaching rejected takeoffs, RTOs. So an RTO is, in a piston twin, is a control issue, not a stopping issue, because we have to do it here. It says maximum engine failure speed is 50% of VMC. So what are we talking about? 40 knots. And this is where I want 100-foot wide runway. And to get this, you're going to teach it from static thrust. But boy, this is one we brief a lot. And what's going to happen is it's very fast. So let's have the next slide, Nick, here. We'll talk about it. So one of the things we have to see, we don't talk about VMCG. And what is VMCG? VMCG is a minimum speed where you can control the airplane on the ground with an engine failure. And this is why transport airplanes have massive rudders, so they have a VMCG. And VMCG is affected by crosswind. And of course, the big difference with VMCG versus VMCA is you can't bank the airplane, basically. So it's all rudder. And when they do on a transport VMCG, they don't have nose wheel steering. So it's just got to be the rudder. So one of the tricks of training these things is if we've got a crosswind, we don't want to fail the engine on the upwind side, because now you've got the yawing effect of the crosswind plus the engine out yaw, and that speeds things up. So you basically want to fail the downwind engine. Now the crosswind kind of dampens the rotation once you fail the engine. So we have to introduce this at 50% of the MC, which is 40 knots, basically about the first airspeed comes alive. And I do this with a mixture. So we've briefed this. I always start with a static thrust. In other words, it's like a short fuel takeoff. They're always static thrust. And in fact, when you release the brakes, the minute you see the airspeed come up, you just pull the mixture on the downwind engine. Now, you pull that mixture, and the minute you do that, you put your hand over the student's hands. If he didn't close the throttle, you close them, because this airplane's out of control. And the minute the throttles are closed, you can go back over there and push the mixture back up, and it just goes to idle. If you let it stop without pushing the mixture back up, then you're going to have a hot start on the runway. So we brief this, we talk about it. I probably do 2 or 3 of them in lower power. I might do one with cruise power, I might do one with takeoff or with climb power. And then after they've got the muscle memory right, then I'm going to do one with full throttle. And basically you can do 2 or 3 of these on a runway, practice, but you need to see this. And one of the things that's so important is this is why you got to have your hands on those throttles, because if you don't have your hands on the throttles, you don't have time to get them up there. And in fact, don't be looking inside. All you need to know is you're looking right straight down the runway center line. And if you have uncommanded yaw, you close the throttles. There's nothing else you need to know about this. You don't care which one it is. You just go close the throttles. And so this is just one that you have to work up to gradually, but it's the real world, basically. I mean, you have to, there's no accelerate going in a piston twin. So you have to close the throttles if you get uncommanded yaw. So out the window, on the center line, uncommanded yaw, close the throttles. End of discussion.
Yeah, and that's also, as we were talking earlier, Hobie, the briefing we do in jets, it's like not just if an engine fails. If anything happens that's a surprise or not, expected, something weird, you're going to stop. So you should be spring loaded to bring them back. And that's what we're trying to train into our people, because a lot of these people are going pretty quickly into some pretty powerful equipment. Used to be you got a twin rating, you'd ever used it, but now they're like, you'll find them in the right seat of a Gulfstream in 3 years. So,
And I mean, when you get in transport airplanes, as you know, David, you have a low speed abort for anything. You only have a high speed abort, and Boeing cuts it off at 80 knots. So above 80 knots, it's got to be something serious. But you're right. It happens very, very fast.
and you can hear what this gentleman is saying. He's saying that he's been surprised by a few people who didn't do it right.
Right. So that's why you put your hand over their hand. I mean, when you cut that mixture and I put my hand over the student's hand, if it's not closed, we close them with his hand right on it.
So MEI, beware. Yeah.
So now we're going to talk about takeoff performance. And to do this, we have to talk about a little bit about the difference between a Part 23, which we have, and versus a Part 25, which is a transport category airplane. And what we want to do is emulate as much of the things that you can off the way they do it. So first of all, in the transport category airplane, you have VMCG, and you have a V1 minimum. V1 minimum is the minimum speed you can continue to take off at. And that has to be above VMCG, obviously, or you can't control the airplane. So V1 minimum cannot be less than VMCG. Then we have a V1 maximum, and that's the maximum speed we can stop. And that can't be above rotation speed. So in a normal takeoff where you have a lot of runway, you have a spread between V1 minimum and V1 max. Now, in the transport world, the most overpowered airplane you're going to fly is a two-engine airplane, because I have to lose 80% of my performance to still meet the climb gradients. The least powered airplane you're going to have is a tri-jet, because that's the best balance. And then a four-engine airplane, actually, you got a lot of power. So in fact, the runway is the bigger issue than second segment climb. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to minimize, you can see down the bottom here, we're trying to minimize our area of risk. So my point in this is, in light twins, I don't try to, now where did we get the takeoff rotation numbers? We got them from the sales department. What's the sales department going to try? They're trying to give you the lowest VMC they can get, the lowest liftoff speed, because they're trying to get your runway numbers down. Now, most light twins, if you've got 4,000 feet, you got accelerate stop. As you get shorter, the first thing you lose in a light twin is accelerate stop. That's the longest distance if a high speed abort. So in the transport airplane, the takeoff ends at 50 feet, because that's out of ground effect. And as they said, the reason they came up with 50 feet was the DC-3 had a wingspan of 70 feet, half that's 35 feet. So they wanted to make sure you're out of ground effect. So first segment is from the end of the takeoff to gear up. Second segment is the issue. That's from gear up to at least 400 feet. And the reason they used 400 feet was the old Pistons. They had a 5-minute takeoff power limit. And that's, if they were heavy, that's about as all they got in 5 minutes. Now the jets, they go up to 1,000 feet with them typically, second segment. Then third segment is flap retraction. Fourth segment is up to 1,500 feet. But second segment is the issue. That's when we get around the ground. And in fact, what we're going to do is we're going to push our rotation speed up to, I use VXSE minus 5 knots. So it comes off at VXSE. There's no reason to ever be in the air with an airplane less than VXSE. I mean, why do you want to try to do an airborne? But I told David, I've done airborne aborts because in the twin Comanche, where it sits there with a big fat nose gear, it's like almost like a tailwheel airplane. You can't keep it on the ground. It's going to fly. But we had Plattsburgh. I mean, it was 11,700 feet long and 200 feet wide. So, but I've never seen one less than about 6,000 feet. I mean, because the first thing happens when you close the throttle, you're not over the runway anymore. You're not even sometimes pointed down the runway. You got to fix that. You can't yank the power off or it's going to stall. Then you have to redo the landing. Takes a lot of room. So you're better off to have it right on the ground. I mean, the twin Comanche is the only one like that. The rest of them, you can get the speed. So you're going to come off at VXSE. The bearing gear is 4 seconds. I mean, boom, 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 boom. Now, we talk about don't carry your habits from a single engine retractable gear into the twins, where you're going to leave the gear down as long as you can land. I mean, once you go with this thing, you want to go, because what happens is if you don't put the gear up and then something happens, you're going to forget it. So once we rotate with this thing, and it's going to come off at 5 degrees, we go to 7 degrees, we put the gear up. Once the gear is up and we have, it'll be at VYSE, and then you're going to come right up to about 10, the bearing will go to 10 degrees easily. Sometimes we're flying the other day and the temperature, the density altitude is minus 3,800 feet. So, matter of fact, we had a barometric pressure of 30.94. I would say that's Alaska stuff. I haven't seen one like that, you know. And of course, if it goes above 31, you have to shoot visual approaches, because there's no way to set your altimeter. You can't set an altimeter above 31. That's just interesting trivia. So once this thing, like I say, you run it up to VX, you're going to use a V1 max in essence. And we want energy going into second segment. So we're going to rotate it VXSE minus 5, which in a bearing is about 90 knots. Go to 7 degrees, put the gear up. By the time you do that, it's going to be a VYSE that comes right up to 10 degrees. So because you want to get it away from the ground, remember, potential energy you're not going to lose, kinetic energy are. And you see these people do these flat high-speed departures. If they lose an engine, that speed's gone instantly, but your altitude is not gone. So what you're trying to do is get away from the ground. And I usually take it right up to 1,000 AGL and then transition to a cruise climb, basically. All right, next slide. So we're going to talk about the lift drag demonstration. And why do we do a lift drag demonstration? Because we need to quantify the performance. Remember, we said pitch plus power plus configuration equals performance. So what we need to quantify is the performance loss for different configurations. And basically, it's like money in the bank, right? The bearing will do, a 55 bearing will do about 300 foot a minute. And I was telling David, you know, if you lose an engine, you lose half your power, but you lose 80% of your performance. So if both engines are running, once it's 10 degrees nose up, you can look at that vertical speed, and 20% of that's what you're going to get if you lose an engine, basically. And the bearing will go to 1,600 foot a minute pretty easily, especially at 55. That's So anyway, what we're going to do with this is you got to have a smooth date. You got to take your time to set it up, because we're measuring. Now, some people do this in loss of climb, but I don't. I do it all in a descent, because I want to see. I can read my loss right off the vertical speed. I don't have to do any math. So you got to really take some time, and you want to get it slow. And one of the things to do is teach them to slow this thing up at level flight. I always see people climbing, right? If you're on an instrument flight plane, you come in a holding pattern, you can't be pulling the nose up. You got to get the speed back, right? So just close the throttles. They say, oh, my airplane won't slow up. I said, just close the throttle and see what happens. Oh, you know. It's amazing the power they're trying to slow it up with sometimes. But anyway, we're going to do a level flight slow up back to blue line and clean. And then what we're going to do is stabilize it. So I've just got enough power to fly a blue line. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do an energy transfer. I'm going to set the left engine at 0 thrust. I'm going to bring the right engine up so I can do slow flight, 2 degree bank. I'm in slow flight at blue line. And this is where I want it stable and trimmed up to. Okay, so now we barely have enough power to fly a blue line on one engine with a 2 degree bank. And we're just going to do some maneuvers to start with clean. Actually, the way I do this is probably not the way I've got them there. But the first thing is take the 2 degrees out. And when you take the 2 degrees of bank out, you can feel the rudder go in, because we're inducing that side slip. And that probably is going to cost you 100, 150 minutes. You know, I flew all these about a week ago just to calibrate all this stuff, but it's about 100, 150 feet a minute if you take that 2 degrees of bank out. And 2 degrees has been tested by all kinds of people, and that seems to be always where we come up with. And so if you have the old needle ball, then the ball's halfway out. toward the operating engine. And if you have the glass panel, and I don't know, I call it a sailboat. So the hull's got to be halfway out from the sail. That's about 2 degrees. And if you want to get fancy and bring a piece of yarn like a glider, you can tape it on the nose and you can see the yaw string. So then we're going to do a 15-degree bank turns. And in a 15-degree bank turn, there's no change in stalling speed. So guess what? It's half standard bank. On transport airplanes, if an engine failure, you always use half standard bank. For that reason, you're not degrading your performance. You want to climb, I don't want to turn. So in a 15-degree bank, that same power will keep it level. Now you roll it in a 30-degree bank, boom, it's going to start to sink probably 100 there again. These things all seem to be about 100, 150 foot a minute, basically, on those two. Now the interesting thing is you push the nose over and I stabilize it, blue line plus 10 knots. This is devastating, right? I mean, now we're going down about 300 foot a minute the day we did it. So you got to be back on speed. Speed control is important. Now here's the trap. Now we're going to go 10 knots slow. And remember we said that your performance speeds are always above your control speeds. Well, when we start sacrificing our energy, we're going to run into control issues. And this is what happens. So we start bleeding that back and it looks like great because we're killing our airspeed, right? So it's climbing, 300 foot a minute. Say, wow, this is good. And pretty soon, and when we did this in the Baron, my student Pete, who was he's an Air Force guy, was a good one to work with. Anyway, he said, gee, I'm out of rudder. And I said, surprise, right? So if you keep going and rolling some aileron, this is tragedy in the making. So remember, that's just a cockpit discipline issue. If it won't work at VYSE, it isn't going to work, basically. You got to just accept it. So now we're going to run through the different configurations. We put flaps at approach in the Baron. Oh, good heavens, that's probably about 100, 150 foot a minute. So the flaps are all lift flap, very little drag with them. Then we put the gear down. And when we did this, it went to about 400 foot a minute, 300, 350, 400 foot a minute. And we go to landing flaps, and that seemed to settle in at 500 foot a minute down in the 55 Baron. So here's the interesting part. Now we're going to take that throttle that's at zero thrust. We're going to pull it hard, close, and let it windmill. And guess what? That doubles the drag of the land. In every airplane I've ever done this, whatever I got in a full landing configuration, the windmilling prop doubles it. So the bearing goes to 1,000 foot down. So now we can start to do some math here. We have 300 foot a minute climb capability. Obviously, I can't deal with 1,000 foot down, and we clean it back up the same way, right? We go back to zero thrust, goes back to 500 foot a minute. We go back to flaps approach, and it goes back to about 350, 400 foot a minute. Put the gear up, goes back to 150 foot a minute. Put the flaps up and back to level flight. So now where people make the mistake, that's what I was talking to David about, is that if I'm doing an approach, I mean, a 3-degree glide slope is 5 times your ground speed. So you can say in jets, you're probably always talking about 700 foot a minute, roughly 750. And in small piston airplanes, you're probably talking 500 foot a minute. So if I have 300 foot a minute climb capability and I'm willing to descend 500 foot a minute, then I really have 3 plus 5. I've got 800 foot of excess capability over what I'm trying to do. So there's no reason I can't have the gear and the flaps down, which is only going to take half that. I've still got 400 foot I can work with one engine. And this is why in a 2-engine airplane, you always shoot an engine out approach with approach flaps. And there's no reason not to land there. But the Baron has very little pitch change with landing flaps. So in fact, if you want to land, once the runway's coming up with a threshold, you can put the flaps down. Now, we're going to talk about the other thing we're going to talk about a little later, but the FAA practical test, when I looked at it, now wants you to land with zero thrust on that other engine, which is quite a difference in the stopping capability. So, this is the other thing to consider is if I don't close that other engine, when I close the throttle, I do close, I'm going to have a little bit of a yaw change. And I never, if I'm cross country and I have rudder trim, I always take it out at the outer marker. I don't want the trim to bite me when I close the throttle. So I always shoot that approach with no rudder trim on it.
And I just want to back up here because this is what I was telling you about how much Hobie comes out with in just a little phrase. I hope everyone caught that. He calibrated the drag on everything, and then he played it against how much performance he had, figured out to 500 feet per minute down, we had an 800 foot per minute delta. So he figured out, okay, I can fly that with gear down flaps. So it's just, it's just doing the physics and doing this drag demo early with your student. And I have them actually write down how many feet per minute for each one. Doing that with your student really empowers them to be confident when they do lose an engine, how they can get performance out of their plane. Sorry, Hobie, just you told me that.
That's great. And in
that
fact,
is genius.
If you're flying Beechcraft, you can go on ABS, and Tom Turner's got it all there. He's got the whole
I know
chart.
they Tom Turner and the Beach people have great guidance here. But yeah, this precedes anything you're going to be, doing with VMC or anything else. This is building confidence in your pilot. You do this drag demo early on before you start scaring them to death with VMC. We talked about training scars last time in stalls. If stalls scare people, VMC gets them terrified.
Yeah, and I mean, so what we're talking about is a way to do this safely so you can experience what it's like. So, all right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to separate an airspeed recovery from a power recovery. In other words, my thought is this, if I'm 500 feet or more in the air, why do I want to yank the power off? I mean, I don't need to. I just need to fix my speed. Now, VMC is variable. And one of the things I do in these is I have the student, when he gets to full rudder, when the rudder hits the stop, he calls VMC. And I'm going to let it go a little farther so you can actually see the recovery. Because that's where the learning happens. You see how this, always remember, roll is not dangerous, but yaw is extremely dangerous. And the rudder is only going to give you roll. The ailerons are going to give you yaw. So the first thing we do is in starting this thing, I start it faster than the FA does. I started at cruise climb speed, which in the 55 barons, 130 knots. So I'm going to be at 130 knots. And then I set the thing up. So I'm going to have props are full forward. And remember, if you have a baron before 84, like this one is, the throttles are in the middle. And if you have one after 84, the gear and the flaps are reversed and the throttles are on the left. So we do things very deliberately in the baron. So you're going to set this up at 130. Props are full forward, mixers are full forward, cowl flaps are open. The right engine goes against the stop and the left engine comes hard idle. Now, when I do that, I have different airflow on the two wings because one wing has my forward airspeed plus thrust, and the other one has my forward airspeed minus drag. So now here's the only time we ever use the aileron. So before we start this, we're going to balance that so the airplane's, and it's very little aileron input, just incredibly low. I say 5 degrees of yoke. I mean, it's almost imperceptible, but so the airplane is flying level now with the rudder. It's got into controlling the yaw, and I've got no bank. So the ailerons are now fixed at that point, and I don't use rudder trim or aileron trim, no trim in this. So now what you're going to do is just start. The classic thing in any of these maneuvers is 1 knot per second. That's what we want to lose. But we want it to roll back. Whenever you're testing stuff, you want to approach it gradually. You don't want to come in at it fast. So we start pitching up, and we just keep pitching up, pitching up, pitching up. And I have the student tell me full rudder VMC. Now, one of the reasons I don't like blocking the rudder is They don't know how much pressure it is. And a lot of times they'll say, oh, I got full rudder. And I put my foot up there and push on. He doesn't have full rudder. So I want that rudder to go against the stop. Once it's against the stop, remember, roll's not dangerous. Yaw is dangerous. And in this wings level, we're going to be well above stall speed. Now, the point is you're above stall speed isn't necessarily going to protect you, because if you put the ailerons in, you're going to generate a side slip that will stall the vertical stabilizer. And that's, I've had discussions with people, other instructors about this, whether it's the vertical stabilizer or the down aileron wing. But I think it's the vertical stabilizer. But regardless, they're both going to stall. It's going to snap roll. So that's why you don't want any aileron, because the roll is not dangerous, but the aileron is. And the ailerons are fixed, and I've got my hands on them, and we just keep slow it up a little bit, and very gradually starts to roll, and let it go to, I don't let it take more than 20, but usually 20 is my target. Once it's rolled about 20 degrees, we're going to do a pitch recovery. So we just tuck the nose down about -7 degrees, 200 feet, bam, it rolls right back level. So
that's something your CFI didn't teach you in initial multi-engine training, right, Hobie?
Right. Fortunately, I had that's like I've heard Rod Machado say, us old guys, we learned from those 8th Air Force guys, and they if they survived, they knew what they were doing. So that's
So the application here, you mentioned it. If I'm 500 feet or more climbing out, there's no need to be bringing power back. We just, in a VMC occurrence, we're bringing that nose down. And you're going to take this further, I know. But the one thing also I wanted to just emphasize is that idea of the aileron. If you've been teaching in twins, you're going to see as it starts to go into VMC demo. And like I said, Hobie and I, we both take it so it starts to yaw off before we relax the pressure. You're going to see those ailerons starting to creep. They're going to start to want to move them, and you've got to guard them if you're an MEI.
Right. You have your hands right on the aileron. You don't need to do the push-pull, but the aileron doesn't move. You got
it. It does not move.
Not move.
Okay, onward.
And that basically is about a 200-foot recovery. That's, I don't know, I pick 500 feet out of the hat, because basically every time I do it within a couple 100 feet, I'm back level.
And it's an amazing, empowering demo. There's no power back, just a pitch. Airspeed.
I mean, and in the real world, you wouldn't even let it go that way. I mean, you always want the rudder off the stop a little bit. And the minute it hits the stop, you're going to lower the nose. You're not going to let it get to this point. But what I'm trying to do is show them the recovery, basically. And why do you want to close the throttle and dive on the maneuver? And this is the other problem. I mean, first of all, you can't get muscle memory out of briefing. So I've seen excellent briefings, but if you can't play with it, then you don't have it. When the chips are down, you're going to default to your training and your muscle memory, and you got to have it, because things happen fast here.
And there's the fear factor, obviously.
Right. So, all right. So that's the first one. We've talked about an airspeed recovery. Now let's go to the next slide. Nick, we're going to talk about a power recovery. So let's say we're below 500 feet and we're in terrain that it doesn't look like we're going to be able to climb out of. I mean, you got to remember, even to do IFR, you got to have 200-foot per nautical mile, 3.3%. There's no piston twin, maybe a 421, but most of them are. The turboprops will, but the pistons aren't going to do this. So now we're going to do the same thing. We start the same way. Everything's the same. Wings level. We fix the ailerons, no rudder aileron trim. We start up and we let it roll to 20 degrees. Now the difference is we're going to recover with power, so this is a full rudder maneuver. So when it's rolled to 20 degrees, now you can't yank the throttles closed, they're going to stall the airplane. So basically what you do, once it's 20 degrees, you take the good engine and you bring it back half's a good target. Boom, it just rolls level. And remember, you always have to establish control before you worry about performance. Performance is a mood issue if you're out of control. So it's always control first, then deal with performance. So now it's wings level, we have it in control. So now we're going to say, okay, let's assume it's not going to fly. We're going to make an off-fuel landing. Well, I don't want to fly this thing in the ground at blue line. I'm going to slow it up. So now what we do is this is full rudder, because the kids want to put an aileron. You got to stop that. They want to let up on the rudder. You got to hold the rudder in. But as it slows up, you keep bringing the power back. So this is what I was telling David, the amount of power you can use is determined by rudder authority. So as I reduce my rudder authority with speed, the power has to keep walking back. So I keep it in balance. And we walk it right back to threshold speed, right? You come right back to the bearing about you're back to 90 with it. So okay, so now I don't bother with flaps and gear, but basically you put the flaps and gear down and land it. But your normal landing speed, but the power's back quite a bit. I mean, probably the power's back at the end. You may be back to 18 inches with it, basically. So, okay, so now how do we get out of this? This is the other thing, right? Because this is going to lead into how we're going to deal with some of the other issues. So now to get out of this, we're going to just put the nose down about 5 degrees and let the speed start to increase. So as it starts to increase that power setting, it's going to start to turn into the good engine. Now I stop the power by walking the throttle back up, right? So I'm steering with the throttle, basically. The rudder's against the stop. The throttle is managing my yaw. And guess what? By the time I get back to VXSE, the throttle is right against the stop. Off we go. So that's a power recovery. And this would, I've said 500 feet, but it could be more than that. I mean, if you're in a situation where the airplane you're going to have to make an off-field landing, then you want to get it back to landing speed. And in the real world, when I nurse it to the best place I could get, you might want the gear up, you might not want the gear up, but I'm going to put the flaps down and we're going to land it, basically.
And this is the genius that I had not heard before. And you can see what's happening here. As he brought power back, it's starting to roll into the good engine. Then we're bringing up power on that engine to kind of balance that. So he's balancing the power against the yaw. I mean, because you do have to slow down, obviously, if you're going to get the best glide. So you can't just keep that power there. And I had to hear this like 3 times. And I said, now I see what you're doing.
Right. And if you try to put aileron in there, you're going to die. And this is what he did in Las Vegas. I mean, you can watch that snap roll.
Yep.
Exactly.
Amazing. Onward. Okay.
So now we're going to go to VMC demonstration 3. And what we're going to show is VMC is a variable. So on this one, basically, you can jump down here to repeat above with a 5-degree bank in the filled engine. So we're going to go back and start this over again, except we're going to use 5-degree bank into the dead engine. And guess what? When the 55 bearing will roll off at 125 knots, which is well above, that's 20 knots above blue line, basically, with only a 5-degree bank. So the point with this one is, and it doesn't matter, we can do an airspeed recovery or power recovery, but the point with this is VMC is conditioned on airspeed, and the condition is full rudder. And there again, that's the ailerons is going to kill you. The roll is not dangerous. The yaw from the aileron producing is extremely dangerous because at high ways, ailerons are not your buddy. Basically, they're going to create yaw and not give you the roll. All right, so let's go to the next one, Nick. And this is the where you put it all together. Everybody likes scenarios. So this is a scenario, right? So what we're going to do is this is the real deal. We're going to pretend that we're going to be at 6,000 feet start. And we're going to pretend we took off at 6,000 feet. We're going to climb straight ahead to 6,400 feet, which would be if we didn't have an ODP at 400 feet, you could turn on course. So at 6,400 feet, we're going to roll it at about a 20 standard rate turn, 20, 25 degrees of bank. When he does that, I'm going to pull the mixture on the inside engine. This one is interesting because this is very dynamic. And the reason I like to pull the mixture is this is the real world, right? So we're really going to cut that engine. So at 6,400 feet, he rolls it into the turn. I pull the mixture on the inside engine. This thing's instantly heading right over and back. Now, why I like this is the student has got both hands on the throttles. And what I tell him, it doesn't matter. I'm not trying to sort out what happened. All I know is it's rolling. I'm going to take both throttles and bring it back to half because the dead one doesn't care. So the minute this rolls, put full rudder in, throttles to half. Bam, it rolls level, just like that. So now I'm in control. Okay, so now now I'm slow. I got to fix this thing. So now what I'm going to do is once it rolls level, I'm going to start that shallow descent with a full rudder. It starts turning the rudder. I walk the throttles right back up. So voila, I'm back at blue line. The power's all the way up. I'm in control. Now I'm going to deal with the emergence, right? And just take my time, basically. And I'm going to, this is here again. This is transport stuff, but basically, you just don't start pulling knobs. You look and you put your hand on it, and you announce what you're doing. So okay, and I tell them, wind your watch. I make them take their foot off the rudder because if they're nervous, they're going to be pushing with both feet. So if you put one foot on the floor, then there's no question, right? The foot's on the floor is the dead engine. So that's the old guys used to say, wind your watch, but think then act, don't react. So I'm in control. I put one foot on the floor. I reach up and I look and I touch and I say throttle, right? And I got left foot, left throttle. And now I'm going to identify it, right? I'm going to bring that throttle gradually back. I shouldn't have any change, no flight control changes, no noise changes, nothing should happen, right? If it does, I got the wrong engine. Okay, so that's identified it, then I'm going to go back and put my hand on the propeller, which is now remember, the throttle's in these beaches in the center. If you get a new beach, it's on the left, so it matters which airplane I'm in. Then I do the same thing. I verify it with a propeller knob, and I just start walking that back. Nothing should change. I get that back to the gate, and everything's copacetic. Boom, feathers. You can feel the airplane accelerate as this thing feathers. And now off we go. We start climbing. And you know what? Every time I've done this, basically we're out of this we started this at 6,400 feet. We're level climbing at 6,200 feet. So we only used half the altitude. And that's kind of where I had the 500-foot thing came from, basically, is what I see in this thing.
So this is the one you call the graduation ride.
This is your graduation one. So now I've got an engine feathered, and we're going to do our single engine maneuvering, right? We can do turns left and right, and basically.
But you can see as an MEI, if you're pulling that bottom engine with a mixture, you're hanging it out there a ways. You got to be ready to react if the learner doesn't obviously react correctly. That's why his hand's there ready to go.
Right.
Because it moves quickly in the downhill direction.
And the ailerons are definitely locked. They aren't going to move.
No.
So the point being, that's the real deal. You got to really, because in the real world, when it quits, you don't care. You just gonna bring both throttles back, and I'm going to get it under control, and then I'm going to accelerate back to my speed. And like I say, it only took this happened at 6,400 feet. We're out of it at 6,200 feet. We used half our altitude, and so now we play with the engine out stuff, right, and do turns left and right, and this don't turn the dead engines came from the old Martin B-26, which had a small rudder. And in fact, that one, the BMC could be above your rudder authority if you turn into dead engine, although that's where, I'm trying to think now, Bob Hoover, that's where he got to start, right? They wanted, Curtis LeMay sent him out there to teach people how to fly his B-26. He fed an engine, slow rolled it. So, I mean, he was just a master. But the point is, he was a master of engine management, probably the best there ever was. But a modern airplane doesn't have any problem turning into the. But remember, if we're trying to climb, we want half standard rate banks because that's going to give us all climb performance. We're not going to have any loss of performance with that. And so we do our stuff, some turns, some climbs, and now what we're going to do is we're going to do cross feed. Now, they was telling me somebody had a fit because they were using the manual. But remember, on our little airplanes, we don't have abnormal procedures. So there's three kinds of checklists. There's a normal, which you do all the time. Those are usually flows because you do them every single day. There's an emergency one where you have to have memory items. And there's an abnormal one. What defines an abnormal checklist is it's not time critical. Okay. So on your light twin manuals, the old ones, when you get out of the memory items, then you're in an abnormal checklist. Like once control's established and I'm configured, I've done all the magic engine out stuff. Then now, and it's very important in cross-feed because all of these twins have different cross-feed procedures, and probably the worst one out there, the one that have all the engine failures, are the Cessna twins because they have a reasonably complicated fuel system. You know, can have a wing locker tanks which only pump into the outboard, and if you have an air conditioner, you only have one wing locker tank, and now you've unbalanced the fuel, and then you got to balance it. I mean, you got to pay attention. But on the Baron, you just get the manual out, and you know if you have adequate performance, so you're well above blue line, and there's no reason it can't be on the autopilot. You're the rudder. Remember, you only have a 2-axis autopilot, so you can't let it put in aileron because ailerons is a bad deal. But just get the checklist out and read it. And we put on crossfeed and let it run a while just to show you. And then we go back to tank to engine. And then I'm going to restart and set 0 thrust and proceed.
Now, later on, was that the slide that you had on? Because there's a question in the chat talking about any precautions for restarting. We have a slide later, isn't there?
We do talk about a restart. Yes, there are.
Okay, so we'll get to that later.
So this is the graduation exercise. Once the student can do this stuff, he's not going to have any problem with the FAA maneuver. But you've created the muscle memory. He understands what the power does. He understands what the rudder does. He understands that you got to stay off the ailerons. That's the big one. That's the ailerons are what are going to get you in trouble. They will cause it to flat spin. All right, Nick, you got the next slide here. Let's go to the next one.
I think this is where we beat up the FAA. Right?
This is where we beat up the FAA. Let's go to the next one, Nick. You want to look at the FAA.
Sleep.
Okay, here's the FAA VMC demo. Well, let's look at the differences. First of all, I think they started too slow, right? They initiated VYSE in takeoff configuration. Now, you're up, right? And the critical engine, so I think that's too slow. It's hard to establish your ailerons before you get into this thing. And then the critical engine is windmilling, hard closed, operating engine at max power, establish one engine operative climb at VSSE plus 10. Now in the Baron, now if you don't have VSSE, I've got the VSSE in the Baron is 85, the XSE is 96. So that is very slow, way too slow. Because you're into this thing before you're set up for it. So now the other thing is, remember this is a test pilot maneuver. That's where the 5-degree bank comes from. If you look at the ACS, it says use best performance climb. That's 2 degrees. And do not use the ailerons. Remember, before you start, once you got your setup, before you start decelerating, you want to have your ailerons fixed so it's flying level and you don't touch them again. Now, there's your 1 knot per second, right? So it says first indication of full rudder deflection, uncommanded roll or stall. You don't want to stall this thing. And what will stall it is that remember the fact that you're above your normal 1G stall speed is irrelevant, because in these accidents where if you roll that aileron, it'll stall way above that speed. So the fact that you're above your stall speed isn't going to protect you, because once you stall, that vertical stabilizer is going to snap roll basically. And when I've watched some briefings on these, I've seen some videos on it. I mean, and they're blocking the rudder. So I mean, there's no teaching value in this thing, and it can be very dangerous if you get on the aileron. So first, and people are so afraid of it, they don't even get close to VMC. I mean, basically they slow it up a little bit, they block the rudder so they don't have full rudder. Then they close the throttle and descend down the maneuver. And I'm not quite sure what the teaching value of that is. I think it's, this is what they want you to do. If you take somebody through those VMC demonstrations and understand that stuff, they're not gonna have any trouble doing this stuff.
I remember when I was testing one of your students, Mr. Brown, I think it was. And
yeah, that was the P Baron.
was that a MEI or was that a?
No, it was an MEI.
was an MEI. But yeah, and when I get done, he's like, did you do all of the VMC demonstrations? And I said, the FAA does not require me to do 5 VMC demonstrations, just the one FAA VMC demonstration. But, there it is. And that's what we do. But
And
you can
here
see
again,
how much more.
remember, if you're flying a Seneca 2, which is turbocharged, or anything is turbocharged, then you don't your power doesn't diminish. So the VMC spread is constant up to whatever the critical altitude on a Seneca 2 is 13,000, and most of like the P Baron's 20,000. So
Yeah. And I think I was telling you I was doing some tests in St. Louis, and the Academy MEI was not aware that as you do VMC higher and higher and higher, you're getting closer to the stall speed because VMC is coming down and down and down.
right.
It moves with density altitude, basically.
It does. And that's the reason to do it wings level, because you don't need to be down to the nitty gritty to train with it. You're inducing a much higher VMC, which is safer. So you can.
So when I train this, and even when I test it, sometimes I'm saying, wings level is going to give you a margin away from the stall.
Yeah, it's 15 knots increase, because remember, the VMC increases 3 degrees per degree of bank. So if you take the 5-degree bank out, the VMC in the Baron's 80, so now it's 95.
Yeah, 3 knots for every degree, right?
And that's about what I've seen. The XSE is 96 in this E-Baron. So in all airplanes I've done, you're going to have roll up around VXSE. And basically, remember, the roll's not dangerous. It's the yaw that's going to get you in trouble.
So
anyway,
anyone hangs out to the end, all of these questions are on those 10 questions. I harvest them for, your edification. I think he said that many times now. The ailerons are not useful.
That's right. Ailerons against you. That's because at high OA, they produce yaw, but no lift. They won't.
Right. Okay, what's after this? Are we into
all right, so the next one is, let's go.
We have one in the chat saying, what MP manifold pressure for zero thrust? That's going to vary depending on the airplane. But basically,
and the Baron is
feel it.
12 inches in the propellers against the feather pitch block.
Yeah, it's about 12 on most planes.
Yeah. And a lot of times in the manual, it'll tell you what zero thrust is, basically.
Right.
So if they stall this thing, you don't have long to fix it. It's going to snap roll. And one of the things I said, the Army, the T-42 was the Army version of the Baron, basically the B-55 Baron. And they did a bunch of spin tests with it. What they found was if it spun, they're dead. They bailed out, but they could prevent the spin. And this is not a normal spin recovery. This is a spin prevention thing, and it's an upset that you use basically on any airplane with an upset. So instantaneously, if you get down immediately, there's 3 things that got to happen right off. Rudder against the yaw. Both throttles, you just snap them closed, and you have to unload the wing. And in transport, they want you to unload it to half G. I mean, you don't want to paste everybody on the ceiling, but you got to unload the wing. And when you unload the wing, you get airflow attachment. Now, if it snaps, remember you're doing an inside snap roll. So if you're bottom side up, unloading it is still forward pressure on the stick, even though you're bottom side up. And once it's attached, then you're just going to let this thing pitch vertical until I see airspeed increase. And now, there again, if I want to roll it, then I'm going to do it without any load on the wing, because it's going to give me the max roll rate. And I always tell people, people tend to use little ailerons, except in this, when they kill yourself, they yank it in this VMC. But once it's flying again, just hard over on the aileron and let it roll out. And here again, this is transport. I mean, the Baron is a utility airplane with 4.4 G, so it's got a lot of structure. But typically, you would load it to 2 Gs on a pullout, which works in any airplane. And to calibrate 2 Gs, just fly a 60-degree bank turn. That's 2 Gs. So there's 2 things you need to calibrate. What does half G feel like? That's where you're starting to get light in the seat. Nothing is floating around, but you're light in the seat. And 2 Gs is what you get in a 60-degree bank turn. Now, here's another thing. You don't ever want rolling G's. Remember, your maneuvering stuff is one control, one axis, one time, right? No doublets, no reversals, no rolling G's. You want to just straight pull. And here's another thing most people don't know. The force a trim tab can exert is the square of the ratio of the trim to the actual speed. And what do I mean by that? If I took my Skyhawk, I trimmed it for 60 and I dove it to 120 and I let go. So my ratio is 2. The trim tab alone would put 4 G's on it. So in a massive overspeed, you may be pushing instead of pulling. But you got to keep the G load down. The trim may be really putting too much pressure on it. All right, let's go to the next one. So now we're talking about how we're going to start this engine. So I got 3 issues we're going to do. One is, how do we start after we did a rejected takeoff? Well, basically, I got to do a hot start on the runway if I let it stop. But if once the throttles are closed, if I bring the mixture up, it's going to windmill until you're absolutely hard stop. So you just, the minute the throttles are closed, you push the mixture back and it goes back to idle. That's all there is to it. Now, this airplane has unfeathering accumulators, and boy, and a trainer, this is the best thing you can get. So what an unfeathering accumulator is, it's a little accumulator. Basically, it's a tube that's got air on one side and oil pressure on the other, and it stores oil pressure for the prop. So that oil is trapped in there when the prop is feathered. When I go to unfeather it, I push the propeller up, it releases that oil pressure into the propeller dome. And that propeller doesn't have to turn very much when it actually starts to windmill. Now, once it's windmilling, it's going to overspeed, and we don't want it to overspeed. So the minute it's windmilling, I'm going to bring the prop back about halfway and let it stabilize, and I'm going to push the propeller up. Now, once it's windmilling, then I can just ease the mixture in. It's going to start. And one of the reasons I want to get it out without the engine running is, guess what? I said, telling David, where's all the oil going? Well, the prop's hugging all the oil. Until the prop is happy, then the oil will be in the engine. Now, if you don't have unfeathering accumulators, there's no such thing as a hot start. If you've had an engine shut down and you're blowing 100 plus knot air through that thing, I can tell you it's not hot. It's going to be cold instantly. As a matter of fact, if it's really cold, I don't do this. I mean, it's got to be kind of a warm day to be doing this stuff. You'll end up with one you can't unfeather or can't start. But I just treat it like a cold start, just like I was going to start it on the ground, right? And once it fires, and here again, you got to make sure, you got to be really careful with this, which starter button we're pushing when you're doing this stuff. And so if you're instructing, I'm guarding the controls to make sure they get the right one, make sure that the thing is back tanked the engine, make sure the mags are on, it's ready to run. And then once it starts firing, you can see that prop is going to start to windmill. The minute it windmills, I'm going to pull it back into idle cutoff, because especially on the 4-cylinder engines, you can see that hole in the cell flex. I mean, it's just incredible beating on this engine. It would be like trying to start a standard shift car with it in gear. I mean, it's just horribly hard on it. So once it's windmilling, the mixture comes back off. Same thing. Propeller comes back half. I let it surge so it doesn't overspeed. Then I bring the propeller all the way up, and I'm back where I am with the other one. I just ease the mixture and it's going to run, basically. So that's it. I mean, you don't really want to start this thing with it unfeathered, and that's why, boy, it's hard on an engine. And then the 4-cylinder engines, you can see the whole cowling flex. So,
Yeah.
like I say, the prop is hogging the oil. So I just want to get it to start the windmill, and then I'm going to treat it like the other one.
And your procedure in the manual may be different. I do like this, which is getting it spinning, which is almost what you're doing with the starter on the ground, get it moving and then introduce some fuel into it. How much more do we have? We're at about 9:15.
We're just about there. Let's click the slide here again, and I just want to talk about this.
Yep.
So we talked about single engine approaches, basically, because we know we've got enough. We can do this with gear down. So basically what you're going to do is typically probably approach flaps coming into the gear down point. And the deal with the gear down is gear down and go down, right? So once you start your descent to the runway, then I put the gear out. And you don't want to carry a lot of excess speed here, and don't jockey the throttle all the time. I'm going to set the power and I'm going to block the rudder, and now it's going to fly like normal, right? Anytime I move the throttle, I got to move the rudder. So I'm better off I have an idea how much power I'm going to have. If I need to change it, I can move it, but don't be playing with it. You're better off to have a little smaller speed excursions than you are. And typically you'd fly this at blue line plus 10 with approach flaps until landing assured. Now, on the test, you've got to leave that at zero thrust. So once the runway's made, the Baron has very, very little pitch change going to full flaps. So I just put the flaps down and close the good engine hard because the other one's going to be at zero thrust. Remember, you're going to get a little pitch change now because I got one at zero thrust. I got one with windmilling drag, so the rudder's going to change a little bit. Now, no single engine go arounds below 400 feet or with full flaps. The single engine go around is only on the ATP test, but I do teach that. And let's have the next slide here. Nick, and we'll have this. Actually, I don't have that. But basically, if you're going to do a single engine go around, the bottom line is throttle and foot go together. When you bring the power up, you can't not below 400 feet and not with full flaps. But the Baron does it great. I mean, you just bring the thing you got to remember is no aileron, right? When you push that throttle up, your foot goes with it. Put the gear up. It's going to sink a little bit when you put the gear up. In the minute I've got the gear up, the Baron's going to start climbing, flaps up. You're right back to blue line and off you go. So anyway, this is David's new student. This is my this
Well, and I
gentleman.
wanted to just say there's somebody in the chat asked about training an initial commercial in a multi-engine, and I know that you trained this guy initial pilot in the twin, right? You taught him
Right
to
from
fly.
scratch. He came to me and he wanted to buy a twin, and he said, "Can I learn to fly a Baron?" And I said, "Put it this way: if you can teach a 20-year-old youngster to fly an F-16, you can probably learn to fly a Baron." So I told him 2 years and 400 hours, and it was 26 months and 500 hours. But we did a lot of traveling, and when he got done, when you're doing these kind of airplanes, the last thing they do is solo. And then I didn't even fly with him. He goes takes his test. So now he's
obstacle is the insurance company, right?
Well, yeah, we had John Harden bail me out. He got it for me. He's bailed me out of so many situations, but he had to accept a $50,000 damage deductible. I said, go ahead. I mean, you just did 2 flights. I mean, I just sent him on some long flights. I mean, he'd been flying a lot of cross country anyway. So now he's going to be Davis student. Now he's got an M2. So I'm sending it over to, I need a young
I get to train him in the jet. Somebody wants to know what is the best multi-engine trainer. Somebody's got a Cougar they like, which I like Cougars.
I've flown a Cougar. Cougar's fine. I mean, I think the Baron 55 or Seth Lake flies the Baron 95, the Traveler. But the problem with the Travelers is the Canadians used them all up there. You really got to put some money in rebuilding one if you're going to do that. But I like the 55 Baron. It's got enough performance. The E55 is a hot rod. I'm really in love with that one. There's my old mount. So when I was a young lad, that was the king of its day, right?
Yep. Oh, somebody wants the Beechcraft Duchess is a great one. I do a lot of testing in that. You have
the Duchess because
your fan club is here. A lot of kids that you must have taught at Vermont are checking in on the chat. Metab Sandhu, E-Ray Yimitz.
Yeah, Metab has been my mentee that I got from Dorothy. So we've done he's a great student. I've done a lot of discussion.
He's in a PA-34 200T. Single engine performance on a high density altitude today, like
you may have to make an off-fuel landing. I mean, one of the things I talk about, if you're out west, if you're, and this is not, but basically you teach drift down speeds on that one engine. And what happens is if I'm above my single engine service ceiling and I lose an engine, it's just like on a forced landing. I'm going to fly at a level till I get to blue line, then I'm going to hold blue line. It's going to descend probably to it should level off at the absolute ceiling, but it'll probably drift down the service ceiling because the absolute ceiling you can't do make up for lift and sink. But it will level off when it can, and you just hold the blue line and
Yeah.
let it go
Well, and
down.
I was thinking about training in that high density altitude. You've got the problem with the stall and the VMC coming together. And yeah, it's tough to train in a high density altitude
Well,
situation.
I mean, we're training it.
So what we're going to do here, everyone who wants Master Wings credit, Nick will put into the chat the whole URL for that Google form without the bit.ly link. So that should work. Hobie and I are just willing to sit here and talk about flying all night. You know that, but we don't want to keep you guys waiting. And just a reminder, our next program is January 19th. That's also a Sunday at 8 p.m. Dr. Juan Merkt will talk on managing minimum controllable airspeed, a top-down view. He's one of the people that wrote that chapter 4 in the new airplane flying handbook. So pitch, power, fireworks on January 19th. I see Austin Fang on here, got himself a 421. This is one of my former students. He sent me some beautiful
It's a
pictures.
marvelous airplane. I love the 421.
I was sure he was going to get himself a Cirrus jet, but he went with a classic twin, and isn't that a good thing? So all of this will be up on the YouTube hopefully this week because it's a fairly clean presentation. We can just transfer it up there. If you guys want your credit, that bit.ly link should work. The great thing that we're getting from Hobie here, I think, is where the cautions are for you MEIs. And I gotta say, when I first got my twin rating, it was one of the fixed 10-hour course, which I thought was pretty generous. But we're seeing people now coming into tests, and they got 5 hours, and they're still struggling to find the switches. So I highly recommend a more comprehensive exposure because this is really going to be the basis for your professional career flying a twin. And I see guys that are in jets that don't understand the aerodynamics with the rapidity of the training environment now. So,
And like you said, David, I mean, when you go to a simulator, you never fly the thing above 5,000 feet. I mean, you typically go up to 5,000 feet, do steep turns. It's all approaches and traffic patterns, and it does not replicate these kind of, doesn't do, it's not taxiing, and it's not like the real airplane. Landing is not like the real airplane, and it doesn't do these kind of things well. I don't know what the new ones where they do upset recovery training, how if they're better, but the ones I flew didn't do this well at all.
Yeah, no, they don't, and they don't cover it in a type rating course. They've got all they can do to get you through the procedures, the profiles, the systems, and get you out the door. All the type rating schools like flight safety are backed up a couple of years. So it really behooves you to spend your time and get good training in your initial. So thank you all. I think we'll close it out now and look for us at safepilots.org if you want to join and get a third off for flight. We're in youtube.com/safepilots is where this will be posted. And join us January 19th at 8 p.m. Dr. Juan Merkt will be talking to us about managing minimum controllable airspeed. That's a new maneuver in the initial CFI. He was one of the people that wrote Chapter 4 in the new Airplane Flying Handbook. Dr. Juan Merkt, January 19th at 8 p.m. See you then.